Let's add Bob back to the stream. And Bob, one of the things we're talking about is that today it is the end of the exclusive bargaining period for the Pac-12 and ESPN and Fox Sports. What does that mean? What is the true meaning of that?
Well, in these agreements, especially the longer term ones like this was, there's usually a right of first negotiation included in the agreement at the back end. It allows you an exclusive period to talk with the conference about whether or not you can reach an agreement that would extend the deal going forward or create a new deal going forward. In this case, it's a 30-day period. Both Fox and ESPN have a right. There's no requirement, to my knowledge, that either party has to put an offer to the other. It's just a good faith negotiation. If that passes, then the rights are able to go out to open market.
Right. And so when you look at where the Pac-12 and the Big 12 are, Stuart Mandel, the Athletic, was talking about how there's a good chance that the Pac-12 could go and poach teams from the Big 12. What does the Pac-12 do here? It seems like perception is reality, of course, but it seems like the Pac-12 is in a vulnerable spot. What is the next move, in your opinion, for the Pac-12 here?
The next move for the Pac-12 is kind of get an idea of what their rights are worth on the open market. I think depending on what they see there, and they may have to wait till the Big Ten deal is ultimately resolved, because there's a lot of people looking to get into the Big Ten, and not everybody's going to get a piece of the pie. So whoever's not on the Big Ten rights is probably going to be very interested in what else is out there. And the next one to come up is obviously going to be the Pac-12. So my guess is assuming they can hold everybody together in the interim, they're going to wait till the end of the Big Ten negotiation to kind of have the ability to go out and test the entire market, as opposed to just ESPN and Fox.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting questions is we throw money around like it's monopoly money, like it doesn't mean anything. I mean, these Big Ten numbers, Bob. I mean, we're talking about $100 million per school. Like, I mean, how do you, as a TV executive, and again, you were in the middle of this stuff in your career, how do you find value in that number? We're talking about now billions of dollars. What is the ROI on that?
Well, you have to look at each case separately. Certainly as TV networks, we look at same things very similar to conferences do when they go and expand. We're looking at market size. We're looking at, good matchups. We're looking at past history, all those types of things. We also look at, in the case of a conference like the Big Ten, is there ways that we can expand the Big Ten network to new territories, which is one of the primary plays, obviously, on any Big Ten expansion. It was the same, not so much for Nebraska, but certainly for Rutgers and Maryland. They've got a presence for the Big Ten network on the East Coast. Same thing here. It's Southern California, 6 million home TV market. They're going to try and flip the Big Ten network to a basic service there, which, is going to add, 3 million homes to the Big Ten network. And that's a big chunk of change. So those are the type of things they look at, the networks look at. The conferences are more into, is it going to be additive to the value of our rights deals as opposed to dilutive? Because now we're going to subdivide 16 ways instead of 14.
Right.
What's the academic fit? What's the culture fit? Those type of things is kind of what the conference looks at.
Do you view Oregon as a valuable property to the Big Ten?
Well, I did go to Oregon, so of course I do.
I know you did.
I think it has value. I think the problem that Oregon has is the Big Ten is looking there and going, are they going to bring $100 million in value? And I don't know that they are. And, there's probably, you could make the case that there's more valuable teams in the Pac-12 than Oregon, just because, Oregon's not so big. The Washington market's bigger. Northern Cal's bigger. Stanford's got great academics. Big Ten loves that. So I don't, Oregon's very valuable within the Pac-12, and I think they'd be valuable to the Big Ten if they decide to go beyond the teams they're looking at now. But I don't know that the Big Ten feels compelled right now to run out and just add teams to add teams.
Yep. Talking to Bob Thompson, former president of Fox Sports Networks, here on the Monty Show, as today is the day that the exclusive negotiating period ends between Fox and ESPN. And, you know, when we talk about value and we talk about what brand is worth what, when you look across the Pac-12, and obviously the story now, and we're having this conversation today because USC and UCLA have evacuated the conference, if you will, going to the Big Ten. But there's all this belief system that maybe somehow, some way, UCLA can stay in the Pac-12 and they can make that deal happen. From a two-prong approach here, financially, does it make sense for UCLA to choose the Pac-12 over the Big Ten? And if UCLA does stay, does that give a lifeline to the Pac-12 for survival?
Well, I think the Pac-12, first of all, can survive without UCLA. Would UCLA come back? I don't know. I think they would. You know, they've got a significant debt problem, $100 million, I read somewhere. This will go a long way to get them out. Not sure what the Board of Regents is going to do. I think there's a meeting coming up on that, maybe today as well, which, you know, they are somewhat tethered to Cal. Yep. And whether or not the Board of Regents gets picky and says, okay, UCLA, you got to give some of your money to Cal because you're leaving them without a life raft. So that's possible. I think if there's any chance whatsoever for UCLA to come back, it's going to end up with the Pac-12 creating some sort of unlevel revenue share where certain schools, be it UW, UCLA, Oregon, might ask for a bigger piece of the pie as opposed to just, you know, something that's divided by 10 or, as it's been in the past, divided by 12.
Yeah. What does it take for the Pac-12 to survive, in your opinion? What do they need? What can they do?
Well, I think they're going to have to get at least a rights deal that's going to get everybody at, if you do equal revenue sharing, you know, 30 million more or less. So say $300 million average. So over the course of the deal, which will probably be 5 or 6 years. So you're looking to start, you know, in the 260, 270 range per year, 5-year deal. You got to have to do something with the Pac-12 networks, and that could potentially add some value. I think, you know, one of the things we were talking about before I got cut off was where the mistake the Pac-12 made was going on their own. And so they never really got the clearance that the other collegiate networks got because they just didn't have the juice, the leverage, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So their other mistake was they went with 7 feeds instead of 1. You don't need 7 feeds. It's a mistake.
Yeah.
So nobody wants to carry 7 feeds. Nobody watches 7 feeds. You don't need 7 feeds. It's just an extra expense. So, but what they can do now is they do have an infrastructure. They do have some value to those rights. That might be of interest. You know, maybe that becomes your new streaming bundle for an Apple TV and Amazon, you know, one of those kind of streamers who's kind of biting, you know, dying to get in the game and wants a bite of the apple. That could be a package that could conceivably generate more income for the conference as part of a new, you know, a renewal of a rights deal.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that we hear so much about as far as the Pac-12 is concerned, what do you value as a TV guy? What do you value the San Diego market as? Because San Diego State's a team that we've heard a lot about. Obviously, they've put a lot of money into infrastructure, facilities, growth in their programs. Is San Diego a valuable TV market when you're talking about, you know, the construct of a TV deal?
Right. Well, it's only about 1.2 million households, so it's not Los Angeles, obviously, at 5.7 million households. But I think the thing about San Diego State is it does a couple of things. Number one, I always say I compare San Diego State to Utah and say they did it the Utah way. They've built their football program over the years. Their basketball program's been great. They're putting money into the facilities. I'm actually down here right now. They've got a brand new stadium that's beautiful, 35,000 feet, could go to 55,000 very easily. You know, top-notch facilities. They've got some other issues that the Pac-12 might look at and kind of go, but I think it's a reasonable candidate. The other thing is, you know, it is Southern California. I mean, basically Southern California runs from Santa Barbara all the way down to the Mexican border. And so while you don't get the LA market per se with a local school, you are in Southern California. And that's very important for recruiting for all the schools outside of Southern California. You want to be able to tell your guys that, hey, you know, you're going to get to San Diego to play. And if your family's in Orange County, LA, whatever, that's not that far. Right now, they can't say that after, USC and UCLA leave. So it's an important market. The question becomes, all right, do you go to 11, or if you don't, you want to go to 12? Who's the 12th? And that's all. You get UNLV, Fresno State, Boise State, those type of conversations. SMU, you try and poach Houston before they get in the Big 12. Those type of conversations come into play.
Well, and you bring up UNLV, and I think everybody brings up UNLV because it's Las Vegas, and everybody sees Las Vegas as this exploding market. I mean, does UNLV make sense? Because, their athletic program's not certainly a football program first. I mean, obviously, they're probably more known for basketball, but does the Las Vegas market carry value?
The Las Vegas market carries value primarily because of the market size. It's hard to, look at the school and say, oh, they've got this deep-seated history in football.
Right.
Like you said, basketball probably more than anything. So that's a pure market grab as opposed to a school grab.
Yeah. And then, I want to ask you specifically about Utah. And obviously, this is a program right now that's coming off of a Pac-12 championship, one of the best Rose Bowls any of us have seen in a decade. I mean, this is a very good program with tradition. The game at Utah. Mm-hmm. What is their value? Because a lot of people want to know, hey, let's say the Pac-12 implodes. What is Utah's value? Are they a candidate for somebody like the Big Ten, or are they really in limbo waiting for the Pac-12 to make a decision in a direction?
I don't know about Big Ten. I think all the corner schools certainly would be, by that I mean Utah, Colorado, Arizona State would be of interest to Big 12 because they're adjacent. You have a couple natural travel partners already with BYU, moving into the Big 12. So I think Utah's best case is Pac-12 sticks together and Utah keeps doing what Utah's been doing the last few years, which is kicking Oregon's butt every time they meet. So.
Right.
At least last year.
Yeah. And I think one of the interesting conversations is what you just brought up. Like, you look at travel partners. Let's talk about BYU specifically. Obviously, BYU is a big brand. The ESPN TV deal. When you look at BYU, independence for a decade, how much value is in the BYU brand, in your opinion?
I think there's a fair amount. I mean, they performed at a high level. BYU brings certain issues just because of the church relationship and, will they play this day? Will they play that day? But the flip side to that is they have, wide popularity, not only in the United States, but outside the United States. And so I think you get more than you give by bringing a BYU in. And I was really glad to see them, make that next step. I think they're certainly ready for it. They have the support locally and they have the support nationally. So as a football, if you're not going to play Mountain West Conference football and you're going to play football as an independent, with these conferences getting bigger and bigger, it's harder to schedule good games. And so if you want to be in the discussion for a national championship, it really is better off being in a conference that has a clear path to a playoff.
How meaningful is BYU's national championship? As we talked to Bob Thompson, the former president at Fox Sports Networks, how meaningful is it? Was 1984, and that's a huge debate in this state. Is like, hey, we've got a national championship, and how meaningful is something like a 1984 national championship to BYU's value?
It's kind of outside of the current body of work.
Yeah,
so it's just been a little bit too long. I mean, it's like, in Colorado and Notre Dame had a coin flip and I don't know what it was. They shared it and nobody's talking about Colorado as a national champion right now. But,
that's right.
So, the TV guys have short memories. It's kind of like, what have you done for me lately?
Yeah, and
at least in the last decade.
Well, yeah, but that's my point. Like, I think when you're trying to negotiate with yourself, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, but from my perspective, I think Tom Homo, the athletic director at BYU, has done a remarkable job when you talk about scheduling. I mean, he's put an impressive schedule together. Certainly the Pac-12 10 now is well aware of how good BYU is in football after last year. I mean, when you talk about the ability to schedule games the way that BYU has scheduled games, I mean, I would think that you would agree, and maybe you don't, but I would think you would agree that it's a pretty good feat what Tom Homo pulled off the last 10 years.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, he's smart from that standpoint in that he knows that if he's going to have any chance of having a discussion for a slot in the playoffs, he's got to show some wins over Power 5 teams. San Diego State's the exact same way. I mean, they came in and cleaned up on the Pac-12 last year, and they, if you're in one of the lower 5 conferences or you're playing independent, you've got to show the quality wins in order to make that step. The problem again, though, is as the conferences get bigger, you're going to have a harder time scheduling non-conference games because these conferences are going to go to nine games in conference, and then you're going to play a couple of payday games to bring in someone who's you can beat on homecoming, and it doesn't leave a lot for BYU. I actually think that at some point Notre Dame might have a similar situation.
Well, isn't that the 10,000-pound elephant in the room? It's like, does Notre Dame ever join a conference? And right. One of the things I'd ask you about Notre Dame is there's been a lot of talk about, hey, maybe Notre Dame and the Big 12 can make a relationship with NBC where maybe that Notre Dame doesn't clearly not going to join the Big 12. I think if they joined a conference, it would probably be the Big 10. But correct. If you're Notre Dame, is there any value in making a relationship between yourself and Notre Dame, the Big 12 and NBC?
I think there's value for NBC to make a relationship with the Big 12 and then separately Notre Dame. I don't think that Notre Dame has to necessarily do anything with the Big 12 in order for that to happen. NBC's got to step up and pay Notre Dame what what Notre Dame thinks they deserve, which is probably in the area of what a Big 10 team thinks they deserve.
Right.
And then, that gives NBC 5, 6 Notre Dame home games. And then, what NBC's problem has always been, this Notre Dame games just kind of float out there in space. You have one every other week, every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks. There's no consistency. So what NBC then has is they combine that with a package of Big 12 games, or say even Pac-10 games or Big 10 games, some package from somewhere that gives them a consistent Saturday football that Notre Dame is either the lead in or the lead, or is on the back end of the other conference they retain. And that way NBC has some consistency and something to promote and schedule around, as opposed to just some one-off Notre Dame games floating around out there.
It's interesting also that what comes to my mind here is we're talking about $20 to $30 million in the Pac-10. We're talking about $100 million in the Big 10. And the SEC, I think probably the SEC at this point wishes they had probably waited a minute before this ESPN ABC deal now. Right. But, I mean, is it viable? Can you survive? And let's talk about the Big 12. If the Big 12 does a new deal with what they have now, which would be the big, their 12 teams, right, or whatever, I guess it'd be 14 teams. If you do a deal on that right now, are you making more than you're making? Are you making more than $30 million? Are you $40, $50 million at that point?
You're going to make more than you're making now, primarily because that deal's stale. It's 10 years old. And, they had, I think at the end, it'll actually be 12 years old or 13 years old. So they missed a couple of jumps along the way. And that was part of the problem with the Pac-12 too. They went for length because they wanted a big number to say we got X billion. Well, the only way that Fox and ESPN were going to give them that is if it was over the course of a lot of years. So that's, we end up with a 12-year deal, where the Big 10 has been smart, and Jim Delaney was always smart about it, is he kept his deals shorter in the expectation that, things are going to change, things become more valuable as, live sports value increases. And if I keep it short and I get ahead of everybody, I'd rather be setting the market than reacting to the market. And so that's where I think, for the Big 12, they get more. I think, you got to look and say, well, losing Texas and Oklahoma is just like losing USC and UCLA. That's half the value of the conference, we'll say.
Yeah.
And so while it doesn't necessarily equate to half the revenue because you're not giving those schools a share anymore, they're big schools, and they carry Texas and they carry Oklahoma. And there's just a ton of Oklahoma fans in Texas as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do. I think picking up, the Florida markets, picking up BYU, so they're into a new state there. Cincinnati, having Houston is not Texas, but it's, better than SMU.
Yeah.
So I think they've done a good job in shoring up their flanks and shoring up the areas they've lost, adding some new areas. So I think they'll probably do a bit better. I think everyone's hoping that when the new college football playoff comes around, that's kind of like a payday that's going to, affect everybody in a couple of years. The one thing about the Big Ten deal everybody has to understand is when people throw around numbers like $1.2 billion a year, you got to remember that's the average over the course of the year or over the course of the agreement. Right. So you say if it's a 5-year deal, in the mid-year, you're going to get $1.2 billion. But earlier in that, my guess is the Pac-12 or the Big Ten payouts round one, the first year of the new deal, will be closer to the $78 million range because they usually contain 3 to 4 or 5% escalators annually. So
only $78 million?
Yeah, it's a toughie, I know.
Why are we even doing this deal, Bob? That's incredible. We're talking about $24 million potentially in the Pac-10 to $78 million in the Big Ten.
I think the Big Ten will average at least 30 million over the course, but they're going to start in the 20s, unless they do unequal sharing. And some guys will do better. Stanford, Oregon, Washington will probably do better, and Oregon State and Arizona, Washington State won't do so good.
Yeah. And one last thing on that, because then I want to ask you about streaming before we let you go, but is there any chance that the Big 12 comes out ahead financially of the Pac-12, in your opinion? Like because it can't be, I can't believe the Pac-12 ends at, $25 million. Let's call it 30 even.
Right.
Are you telling me that the Big 12 is under $30 million a year on average per school? That just, that doesn't seem like you can survive on that.
No, I don't. I think the Big 12 and the Pac-12 are going to be pretty par at the end of the day. They both lost their 800-pound gorillas. But what's left isn't bad. You look at the AAC, would you want to be out there? Look at the ACC. They've got Clemson, they've got Florida State, they've got Miami, and they, North Carolina makes an appearance every once in a while. But it's hard to get beyond huge numbers for any, for the Pac-12 or the Big 12 without the conference channels that really aren't contributing anything near what the SEC, ACC, and Big Ten get from their conference channels. They're money makers.
Let's talk about streaming before we let you go. Bob Thompson, former president of Fox Sports, joins us here on the Monty Show. Let's talk about streaming. Like, I am amazed at deals like MLS made with Apple TV, where all your games are on stream. Now, that sounds crazy to me, but is there any way, shape, or form that happens in college football?
No, not right now. The MLS deal is a little misleading. I think if you look at MLS, it's basically what they took were all the regional network deals and the MLS version of Sunday Ticket. I'm not even sure what it was called. And that's the Apple package. There will be probably an ESPN deal. There'll be probably maybe a Fox deal, so the linear cable networks will pick up a game of the week type thing. But, it was a big step for Apple. Prior to that, they had a few, Friday night baseball game. That was about it. So it's a big step for them. And apparently they're bidding on Sunday Ticket, which they seem to be the favorite right now. But I don't see anybody going to a streamer other than for maybe a third tier type package, maybe some bundle of non-conference football, basketball games, and then, a chunk of Olympic sports, that type of thing.
Can anybody besides ESPN make that well-rounded, TV rights deal? Because I feel like ESPN, obviously they offer you ESPN, all of their networks, ABC, ESPN, the app, ESPN Plus. Like, it feels like ESPN is almost a model for streaming and, diversification across platforms. Is there anybody else who can compete with that?
To touch all the various distribution modes, be it, broadcast network, cable network, streaming, radio, international, apps, you name it, whatever. ESPN is definitely the leader. CBS can be close, but their cable network's not the greatest. NBC, same thing. They got rid of NBC Sports Network. They've got the RSNs, but they have USA Network where they can put sports on cable, and then they've got the broadcast network, and they've got Peacock, and so they, no radio complement, but that's probably the biggest least of anybody's worries. So I think but I tell you right now, Fox is probably sitting there going, well, I'm glad we didn't get in that streaming business, because right now it's not looking like, the pandemic is over and everybody's looking at their credit card bills and going, how did I get all these subscription services?
Yeah, seriously.
And you're seeing it. You're seeing people drop.
So before I let you go, we have to light the state of Utah on fire, and we have to ask you, who's got more brand value, Utah or BYU? You moaned. I love it.
In the Pac-12, Utah. In the country, BYU.
Wow,
how's that?
Very good. Are you running for office in Utah? That is a great answer. Bob, I appreciate you very much, man. Thanks for coming on the show. We'd love to talk to you again soon when things change, but thanks for hopping on this morning.
My pleasure. You guys have a good day.
You too. That is Bob Thompson, the former president at Fox Sports. And when he says that, hey, nationally it's BYU, and in the Pac-12 it's Utah. Jake, that was a heck of an answer he gave right there.
I mean, I think it makes perfect sense. I think that's spot on. Nationally, BYU has a bigger brand. In the state of Utah, in Pac-12, in the conference, I think Utah has the bigger brand. I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing to me that he talked about was that you have to figure out how to get more money for the Pac-12. That's one of the big takeaways that I have. I think talking about San Diego State, he makes a great point, that's 1.2 million homes versus 6 million homes in Los Angeles. I think Bob made a very good point there that you have to, I don't know exactly how you do that, but you have to find value propositions. And this is going to be a dogfight. The Pac-12 and the Big 12 do not seem to be headed for a marriage. And I think when you look at what Bob talked about with Los Angeles, I think UCLA, I agree with Bob. I think the Pac-12 can exist outside of UCLA, even if they do leave. But he also made a really good point that, this Gavin Newsom thing and this Board of Regents and the relationship with the California education system, that's a significant player for UCLA. I mean, that is something that they absolutely have to, they have to understand what that is and how you make that happen and how you make that, how do you make them whole? I don't know, because the politics in the state of California are ridiculously deep.
Yes.
The regulation in the state of California is ridiculously deep. But I also think the thing that he brought up that is really significant is, in the Big Ten, it's $78 million a year, bro. If you get $1 billion or more a year, if they do that, that's on average. He's not wrong.
Yeah.
But even at their low end, it's $78 million a year.
Yeah, you got to get that money, man.
That is absolutely incredible. I just don't know. And as far as Utah goes, I still maintain, I thought he made a really good point, that the Big 12 is a comfortable fit for Utah because of your travel partner in BYU, because of the corner states and the corner schools where, you can put all of those together and you can set that conference up any way you want. That makes the most sense.
Yeah.
But I think he also brought up poaching Houston from the Big 12. And I think if you're the Pac-12, I don't know how George Glavkov has not called Houston, because I'd be trying to damage them. I really would. I mean, yeah. All right, let's get some of your thoughts in here. Tanner Plummer says, I don't know, Steve. I think BYU's brand is becoming bigger than Utah and the Beehive State. I don't disagree with that. I think it is. I think that BYU's brand is becoming larger, Tanner. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think winning games is going to
make or break you.
Winning games it's going to make or break you. Tanner says Bob basically admitted that BYU has a better brand than Utah. He didn't basically admit it. He said that BYU's got a bigger brand nationally. Jake will clip that interview. It'll live on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to answer his question. I just think that it's It is really going to be interesting on how you do these things. Gabe Ledley says, can we ask Bob what he thinks the exclusive rights deal for an RSL podcast would fetch on the open market? There you go. I mean, I think that's a huge question. All right, before we get out of here, let's kind of put a wrap around this conversation, because I think it's really important to understand what's at stake here.
Yeah.
Ultimately, who do you think makes more money, the Big 12 or the Pac-12?
I mean, I think right now, like this year, I think it'll probably be the Big 12, but I think I could see a scenario where the Pac-12 is able to up their revenue shares. I could. I just think that the problem is I don't have a lot of confidence in their ability to make a deal. That's the thing. Like, I think the Pac-12 has what it needs to make a deal, but can they actually get it done? That's my biggest thing. So right now, I'd have to go Big 12.
I think I'd have to go Big 12 as well. I think they can both survive. There's a place for both of them. But if you are the Pac-12, you are, in my opinion, man, you cannot lose another team. You cannot lose another brand. And if you really want to survive, I think you have to hope that UCLA has to stay in the conference.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think that's the only way that you can really leverage people. Because Bob's not wrong in that Southern California is Santa Barbara down to the border. I mean, he's absolutely right about that. And I think if you have USC and UCLA, okay, great, you're the Pac-12. Well, USC ain't in this conference anymore, and USC ain't coming back. And if UCLA is there, I think there's absolutely value in San Diego State, and I still don't think that makes you $50 million per school per year.
Agreed.
I don't. I think when you're looking at what the SEC and the Big Ten are doing, I think it makes it very difficult for survival there. I really do. By the way, do I not get any tip of the cap for banning the bots while I was interviewing Bob?
Well done. It was really well done.
Mrs. Monty banned the bots. She doesn't have her microphone today because we were doing an interview. So, Mrs. Monty commented. How about that? Mrs. Monty getting in on YouTube commenting, saying, damn bots. Yes!
There you go.
Yeah, Dwayne Boone said, enjoyed the Bob Thompson discussion. Got to go. Got to go. See you later. Appreciate you, man. We have to go as well. Don't forget, this show is presented by our good friends at Academy Mortgage. Devry Davis and Academy Mortgage, 801-543-9666. NMLS number 278545. You need a mortgage? I'm telling you, you can afford to buy a house. Call Devry Davis, no matter where you're listening to us. 801-543-9666 for the best mortgage guy in the business. And make sure you go check out our friends at Barbecue Pit Stop. You want to win a trip or two to Las Vegas to see BYU and Notre Dame? Hooking up at Barbecue Pit Stop in Logan, Lehigh, Layton, Salt Lake City, and St. George. Fill out the slip, drop it in the box, and you could win a trip or two to Las Vegas to check out BYU and Notre Dame. Until tomorrow, Jake. Say goodbye, Mrs. Monty.
Goodbye, Mrs. Monty.